Doris, Joe, it's a thrill to have you both
Thank
here. Thanks so
you.
much for your time.
Yeah, thank you very, very much for coming in. So before we get to the, mandatory service or just service in general, you have a good sense from your historical work how divided we are in this time. You always talk about the Civil War, obviously, very divided, but we're pretty divided now, I think, too.
Yeah, I think really, and we've talked about this, the time that's most echoing ours is the turn of the 20th century. Because what happened is it was a time like ours when globalization today and tech revolution today has changed everything. Industrial revolution changed everything then. There was a big gap for the first time between the rich and the poor. People in the classes felt very separate from one another. Working class people side by side with huge millionaires living in their palaces. A lot of nativism had risen because there were immigrants coming in, new inventions, people were scared about them. And Teddy Roosevelt spoke about the fact that democracy was in peril in that situation because people in different religions, classes, and sections were seeing each other as the other rather than as common American citizens. And if you lose that fellow feeling of being part of something larger than yourself, a nation, then the democracy is in peril. And I think that's where we are right now.
So Joe Kearns Goodwin, you were the only one of the four of us up here who has actually volunteered. Well, actually, people would say your mother has volunteered for national service her whole career, but not in the same way. Tell us why you did it and what that service did for you, how it changed.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I never sort of planned on joining the military. We don't have a long tradition of military service directly in the family. My dad was in the Army between Korea and Vietnam in the south of France, but his experience was kind of like the movie Stripes as opposed to Platoon. However, as it said earlier, growing up in Concord, surrounded by that history, growing up with my family and my dad talking about, the Great Society, the New Frontier, my mom bringing home these incredible people in American history, it's hard not to be surrounded with a sense that service to the nation is a worthy use of your energies and your effort. But like I said, I never planned on joining the military. I graduated college in 2001, and the plan was probably to go to law school, go to work for a few years, and then go to law school. But September 11th happened, and my life, like so many others, was changed on that day. I went on September 12th to the Army recruiting station in Billerica, Mass, right down the street in Concord, and signed up to serve in the Army. And it wasn't like a sense of retaliation or anger. I wanted some sort of vengeance, but it was a clear sense that this is our way of life was under assault, and young people were going to be needed to do something somewhere. And so, like I said, growing up in Concord, surrounded by this incredible exposure to the history and glory of America, I had been given so much by the country, so it just felt fair, right, and just to spend a few time giving something back.
So how were you different from the day you signed up on September 12th and the day you completed your service? How changed were you?
Fundamentally changed. I think that there were so many things that I got out of my time in the service. What sort of sounds almost like it had been a selfless pursuit became a selfish one, because I served with a group of men and women whose dedication to duty, honor, and country is beyond reproach. Friendships that are forged sort of in the hardships of fire and trial, relationships that we were just talking about that last this day. But I think the coolest thing, and I think what sort of gets to your thesis about service, is that of the 30 guys in my platoon in Iraq, when I was in Iraq, I was a platoon leader. I had 30. It was all guys at the time. Now women are allowed in combat roles. But, every race, every socioeconomic background, every geographic background, truly it was a panoply of America writ large. And there's no doubt that, the kid from a cul-de-sac in Concord, Mass. is probably not hanging out with the moon-eyed private in Kansas or the, gruff sergeant from Quincy or the inner-city kid from Chicago. But there, we all were working together. We worked as one. And the boundaries that divided us are really broken down. We're reforged in a common mission. And one of my best soldiers is now a police officer in Dallas, Texas. And to say that we disagree in our politics is to say nothing. The conversations we have, if they ever do turn to politics, I think in any other context with any other people, would quickly deteriorate into sort of the name calling and the otherness that pervades so much of our discussion today. And yet we are able to disagree without being disagreeable. And that's because we both understand that even though we don't necessarily agree on the way in which the country should proceed, we both want the country to succeed. Mm-hmm. And we understand that we're people that we have the best interest of the country at heart, just have very different views on how to get there.
Can we stay in the past for one more minute, and then we're going to talk about the whole concept of service, whether it's mandatory or otherwise, and what its potential is. When I was writing my piece, you talked to me about a time when a significant percentage of Congress were military veterans. When we have, and by the way, we have a veteran congressperson on the show now. The way they talk about their fellow Republicans is, they may disagree on the issues, dramatically different, and their relationships different. Tell the audience what you told me about that history.
Yeah, it's some huge percentage. In the 1950s, 60s, 70s, people who'd been in either World War II or Korean War made up 70% of the congressmen and senators that were in Washington. And that means that they know what it's like to go across those party lines. And that was a time of bipartisanship. The 50s, when Eisenhower was in, there was that politics stopped at the waterline when it was foreign policy. And obviously in the 60s, those big programs that Lyndon Johnson got passed on civil rights and voting rights and Medicare, they were bipartisan programs. They couldn't have been done without the Republicans. And I think just having had that experience of working together, as Joe described, in the military, which so many of them did, and it's many fewer today than it was then, obviously.
If you want to participate in this conversation, as some of you already done, called 877-301-8970.
So, Joe, do you think we should have mandatory service?
So I am not fully on board with the mandatory aspect.
You haven't
of
talked to your
service.
mother yet? Or
No,
what?
listen, I didn't say I couldn't get on board. I said I'm not there now. I think that, first of all, there are arguments made about the constitutionality, whether it would actually, whether it could find the strict scrutiny that, the 13th Amendment. I think there's obviously huge discussions about the infrastructure that would take to put into place. I mean, with the United States military, you're talking about maybe 2.5, 3 million people that are serving right now. You're talking about 10 to 40 that would have to be supported if you had mandatory service, or 18 to 26-year-olds. But I think more anecdotally for me, I'll say two things that I think why I'm a little hesitant now. First of all, whenever you ask people across the spectrum the value of national service, the percentage of people that come back in polls saying they think it's a good idea and they support expansion is huge. 60 to 7% across party lines, Democrat, Independent, Republicans. The quickest way to turn that upside down is to tell them they have to do it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I think that bipartisan support that exists right now would, like you said, we've had this conversation. Jim, I think you mentioned your piece. We can't get people to agree that putting on masks is a good idea. Philosophically, the United States is just not set up for that kind of social engineering. I think if the state starts telling people what they have to do, the support wanes. And then anecdotally for me, I know when I was serving in Iraq and later Afghanistan, I had these group of people working for me. It was difficult under the best of circumstances. If you then had said, 60% of those people had no desire to be there or being forced to do it against their will, and my job as their leader becomes infinitely harder, which is why I think most military leaders you talk to, most military personnel, would very much advocate against mandatory military service. Now, getting the civilian aspect is different.
There's this historian, though, that we both respect a lot, who feels, that's right,
Yeah.
here she is. Why do you feel differently, Doris Kearns Goodwin?
I guess I think that sometimes you need something really big in order to change our situation where we are today. I think back to Franklin Roosevelt. In March of 1933, he decided that he was going to take all these kids off the streets, young men in New York City, all sorts of cities, and send them into the forests for the Civilian Conservation Corps. And he said he knew that it was a huge enterprise, but in March he made this announcement, and by July he wanted 250,000 kids to be young men, to be in the forest, healing the forest and healing themselves. And everybody said, it's impossible, you can't do it in that time. He said, Americans like big things. And similarly, in 1940, when we had only 500 fighter planes, we were so far behind Europe and so far behind Germany. He said, this year we're going to build we're going to build 50,000 planes. People said, you can't do it. He said, we have to have a big target. So what I think is if you talk about commissioning the idea of a mandatory service and you figure out what would it take, then maybe the expectation of it, if you don't get to the mandatory, you get to a universal service, and you get the expectation that a lot of people are going to join. We have a lot of people in all the programs we have now, but it still hasn't made the impact it could to bring people all together. We need millions more to go do it. And maybe just the commissioning of the thought of how to do it, what would it take to set it up, would allow us to have the infrastructure that universal service could have.
You know, one of the things that leads me toward mandatory service is because, you know, you talked
You're
about...
a convert, I should say, by the way. We've discussed this for 25 years.
Has she
on the
finally
air.
come around?
She is,
come-
no,
well,
she is a
because
convert.
It was your op-ed piece.
Maybe.
It was. Everybody's talking about it, Doris.
Okay,
I know, yeah.
okay, let's keep going. Okay.
But because we're so segregated now, not just by race, but a lot by money. And I think you mentioned in the service you have all these people that are come from all over the place. And, you know, your kid did City Year, but I think a lot of the kids in City Year come from sort of the same place in a way.
Yeah.
My daughter did AmeriCorps. I think it was great, but I think they all kind of came, their politics are more or less alike, you know. Whereas if you, everybody had to do it, then it would be poor kids, rich kids, you know, and rich kids would be a real eye-opener for them, I think. You know, it would force people to be together in a way that I don't think they'll do it if it's a volunteer. I just don't.
You know, can I broach a middle ground with you? You mentioned the infrastructure. I mentioned the piece. My younger daughter served in City Year for a year at a school in Dorchester, and that led me to call Alan Casey, who everybody knows, is the co-founder of City Year, obviously. He's not ready for mandatory service as I described it, and as your mother seemed to think was a good idea. And by the way, not my idea, but the idea of many very thoughtful people. His concern was, I think what you said, building the infrastructure where there are 4 million kids that graduate from high school every year, maybe too much. What he has proposed as part of this big citizenship model that he has written about and talked about is a mandatory service in the second semester of the senior year of high school kids. I don't want to speak for him, but I'm going to try. And Alan, if you're listening, we invited him. He was in a meeting. My apologies. The infrastructure's there because they're there. As he said, nobody does anything the second semester of their senior year
That's
anyway.
why it should be first semester of senior
Well,
year
whatever.
because you want to just party for the last part of senior year.
What do you think about that
I
as a
think
middle ground kind of mandatory, by
yeah.
the way, but for high school
as
seniors?
part of sort of the education process.
Yeah.
It is. First of all, I mean, Alan Case is the one to talk to. He's forgotten more about service, mandatory or otherwise,
Yes,
than
indeed.
collectively we will ever know. And I think it's a really good idea. I mean, I read about it in your piece, and I've talked with him about it before, because you've got that audience. You're right. Their energies are going to be used in some way, and why not point them in that direction? My only worry about that, because so much of what we posit the benefit of this service to be is the broaching of those divides. It's hanging out with the other. It's like being with someone that's not like. Now, if you're just having your high school class and going to volunteer at a local organization, maybe you're not accruing that level of benefit. But I do think it would be super helpful as well. But Alan's also does a number of work, I think, with Carnegie right now, looking at other ways where, as my mom was saying, the expectation of service can be inculcated without it being mandatory. And you can take steps along the infrastructure to set it up. So if you ever do make that leap, it's not starting from scratch as we are right now. And I think that, you know, we talk about AmeriCorps, you talk about City Year. The Serve America Act has been on the books since 2009, and it authorizes a tremendous amount of national service. There are people applying for positions and all these things right now that can't get them because the funding's not there.
I know. The Trump administration has crushed AmeriCorps.
I mean, it's not even just the Trump
Well, even
administration.
pre-Trump, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And it's cheap labor, too.
Yeah, totally. And we just were to authorize if we were just to fund the authorization that exists right now, you'd be well on your way to having a million people a year that you're looking at.
Can I read one text and then let's take some calls for the Kearns Goodwins here about this issue? Anonymous texter, for 10 months after undergrad, I served with AmeriCorps National Civilian Community Corps, based out of Charleston, South Carolina. We traveled on a team of 10 people throughout the Southeast, tutoring in Charleston, building houses in Birmingham, Fort Myers, maintaining trails in Tennessee. The greatest adventure, my team of 10 is still family more than 20 years later, just like you described. There is no comparable experience for building empathy and experiencing communities and people unlike yourself. It's life-changing.
Well, my daughter's been 20 years out, and she's still in touch with the people she was with, because you live with them for a year. I mean, you get to know them, obviously.
Should we take some calls?
Let's go to Jenna in Providence.
Hi, Janet.
Hi, guys. How you doing? Long-time listener. I love your show. Anyways,
Thanks.
I completely, is there a...
There's an
echo.
echo.
We're
It's
sorry.
our fault, but we hear you fine, Jenna. Go ahead.
Great. So I completely agree with the concept of mandatory service. I agree with the previous text that you just read, though, or I think it was the text that you just read about when we're doing mandatory service. I think it should start with the humanities first. Like, because I worked in mental health for a long time, and I think it's extremely important for people to learn about each other and build empathy and compassion for situations that are not their own. But I'm hesitant about putting like military service into that, because I worry that doesn't exactly encourage the same thing. So like, I think the humanities should be first, and then after they've done that for a couple of years, then it opens up to military service.
Jenna, thanks for your call. What do you say about...
I don't think we're talking about mandatory military service.
Well, no, it could be mandatory service, but you could choose military or civilian.
Yeah.
What's your response to Jenna's concern about the military end of this?
I mean, I think that, I can sort of understand where she might be coming from, but I think that the level of empathy that you gain for your fellow Americans is, you realize that in the military as you would anywhere else. Yeah. Because you are with people, as they are going through these intense trials. You're with people as they've sort of been taking out of the comfort zone of their life and put into something new there. And you're forming these bonds that you need to support each other to get through in a real, tangible way that's right there. Now, I absolutely understand, if you're going around the nation and you're helping to, build schools and you revitalize communities, you're gaining empathy for the other people of America besides the ones that you're serving with. But I think it's somewhat probably a misconception that people in the military are not actually driven by empathy, because so many of the missions that we overtake overseas, I mean, yeah, there's a level of sort of, there's a level of things that are maybe considered not empathetic, but you're out there and you're trying to help rebuild this country. I think that you can find it there well.
You didn't sign up to go into Minneapolis, so
no, I didn't. Truly,
we should just be clear about it. Here's one that I'd like you, Doris, if you don't mind, responding. Steve from Wakefield: public service could bring with it loan forgiveness, health insurance, lifetime benefits similar to those available to veterans. This would fill the ranks of people doing it and also move us toward the universal availability of those basic services. You buy that?
I think that's a very good point. I think that what you could imagine is, if you make it a bigger thing, if you have more funding so more people can do it, that it has a critical mass in the country, and if businesses give a certain kind of benefit for having had that service, that when they're going to hire people, that becomes a really positive thing. Maybe some sort of relief for if you go to college or vocational school afterward. If we really make it a goal that this is an important part for a young person to do, and that the country's going to reward you at the other end of it, maybe that's a way of dealing with it. The ideal thing is to have universal service. If mandatory is a problem getting it there, if mandatory is the only way to get it there, then we have to figure it out. But I think that the desire is that you want people to really do this, and it doesn't have that critical mass yet, so that the same kind of people may be doing some, like as you're saying, is doing some of these programs that we already have. I mean, right now, Governor Cox in Utah is having a state program. There's something in Maryland, I think, with Wesley Moore. The more we do it, the more people are going to want to do it. The more parents are going to want their kids to do it. And that's the critical mass we have to reach. So there's an expectation that everybody's going to do this.
I think, can I just add, I think that's right. How do you reach that tipping point? Because right now, if you go and you're getting a job, you look at your resume, you're like, okay, where'd you go to school? What was your GPA? Where were your internships? What if they also said, okay, and where did you do your service year? What was the question then? It becomes just part of the conversation, the expectation that every young person goes through this. So what do you need to do? Is there more funding now to reach that tipping point where it becomes sort of just a societal expectation that it's something that we do?
Here's an anonymous texter. I like the idea of mandatory service for high school, but I'm extremely skeptical the wealthy will participate. I think there would be an explosion, an epidemic of bone spurs.
Okay, fine. Thank you very much.
Talking about, of course, President Trump.
Strump?
Trump.
Oh, Doris Kearns Goodwin. Everybody in this room and everybody listening to the radio show could recite at least portions of Kennedy's speech about what you can do for your country. When did that dissipate? I mean, I was a little boy, and I remember young, old, whatever, everybody feeling incredible pride. And when did that disappear?
I just think about the Peace Corps. One of the encouraging signs is that there was a push on the administration part to defund part of the police, or reduce the of the Peace Corps, to defund, not even defund it, but just reduce the expenditures for it. And it didn't, Congress let it go, level spending. So there's still that desire on both parts to keep one of those big signature programs going. I mean, it was a time in the 1960s which was larger than the Peace Corps. There was a sense that people were driven by the idea that they wanted to be part of something larger than themselves. For me, it started with the March on Washington. Just to be able to be holding a sign saying, Catholics, Jews, and Protestants unite for civil rights, I felt for the first time I was part of something bigger. And the civil rights movement had a lot to do with that. The women's movement came along, the gay rights movement. There was a feeling. So the war in Vietnam, it even had that feeling to it. The anti-war activists were part of something larger than themselves. They believed that it was important for that war to stop. And in the end, Lyndon Johnson resigned and didn't go forward in that race in 1968. Not resigned, but decided not to run again. So I think something happens over a period of time. There's a contagion. There was a decade, there was a feeling, and then the war came, and then we moved away from that. And that's what I'm trying to instill again today. I'd like young people to feel what we were able to feel. It was great growing up in the 60s. And as hard as it was with the assassinations, the riots in the streets, there was something larger than that. There was a kindled spirit that we can change this country and make it better. And it wasn't just from Kennedy. It was the civil rights movement as well as Kennedy, I think.
So the only, I think you're right, but one of the things you talk about those movements, and they sort of came from the bottom up.
Correct.
I think one of the problems with mandatory national service is it's not coming from the bottom up. You're imposing it from the top down. So how can you create that movement, create that energy so that it does come from the bottom up as opposed to it being sort of mandated? But, you know, I've been a little hesitant in mandatory service because I think it's hard. But the other Kennedy quote from that decade is, we go to the moon not because it is easy, but because it is hard.
Correct.
So
Yeah.
maybe there's something there too. Like I said, I'm not on the boat now, but I'm ready to come on if you can convince me.
A lot of our texters would prefer that we wait for any mandatory service until the present occupant of the White House is no longer in the White House.
Well, you know, but that gets back to, first of all, even if there was an embrace of this idea by a lot of important opinion leaders like you, Doris Kearns Goodwin, it's not going to happen tomorrow. I mean, it's got to percolate through the years. And that's where it seems to me it's unreal. Everybody with, I mean, for example, I spoke to Robert Putnam from Bowling Alone, and while he loves the idea, and I'll read a quote that we had him on the radio, and he gave a thumbs up when we talked about mandatory service. He says, the research is quite astonishing. If you give kids a chance to walk in the shoes of people like them, but in a very different part of the country with different political, social, and economic backgrounds, that transforms them more or less permanently. But he went on to say he fears that in this era, youthful alienation, which he said is one of the biggest problems we confront, makes the timing not right. And then, of course, since I couldn't answer that, I put you right in there and let you answer. What is the answer to what Bob Putnam said?
Well, the opposite answer is that in this era, it's more needed than ever before. Yes, of course, there's alienation. Yes, of course, people feel that other people in silos are different from them. But that's the very important reason why you want to bring them together. One of the things that Abraham Lincoln said when he came to the Emancipation Proclamation was, we've reached the end of our rope. We have to try something new. I think that's where we may be right now in terms of that distinctions between classes and religions and races and sections. It's as bad as it's been in a long period of time, and we have to think big. So that's why the expectation. I'd love the idea if we could be universal service, but we get it ramped up so that people really feel, like you said, that this is what they should be doing, that people reward them for doing it, and then it doesn't have to be mandatory, but we have to get it way, way up. Maybe talking about mandatory allows us to say, okay, we can deal with it this way.
You know what else I think, too? If you don't have a way to network, I mean, if you're from a wealthy town or your parents are, you know, able to get you all these special extra things, but if you're not, and you are from the inner city somewhere or your parents aren't wealthy, it is a networking opportunity, too, for kids that that may not have a chance to get out of there.
You want to hear the other side of that?
Yep.
Here's Liz from Cambridge, a text. How do you account for the classed and racialized power dynamics in service models like Teach for America, especially when service is framed as moral formation for the volunteer rather than accountable collaborative work with the communities being served? Most often the communities served by these programs are systematically under-resourced. This model risks reproducing saviorism and deficit narratives of communities these programs claim they're helping. Doris?
I don't know that that is statistically right. I mean, I hope not. I mean, those programs seem to be working well. They seem to have
I have the opposite
evaluations
impression.
that say
Yeah.
that they have really, they've used their talents to help people who are living there. I mean, you can look at it that way, but I don't know that that's reality. I hope not.
Can I ask, before we take a break, can you guys stay for a little while? Is that okay? There's a
Sure.
lot of interest in this conversation. The lines are beyond
Beyond.
Well, before we take that break, though, obviously you've written about leadership your whole career. There was a poll out of a lawyer in New York City. I didn't use it in the piece because it was an outlier where he said the significant majority of young people actually supported this. But let's assume that poll is wrong. A leader who embraced this notion, who had the charisma of a Ronald Reagan or a Barack Obama, could change the public perception on something like this. Could they not, or am I being unduly optimistic?
No, I do think that we have to believe in leadership. Look, you just mentioned John Kennedy. I mean, I think he set a tone for the decade, not just in that inaugural address, but just in the activism and the way he talked to people, that he wanted them to be part of making the country better. I definitely think if a series of leaders, and there are leaders now, there's General McChrystal, there's a bunch of leaders out there that really want this to happen. It's a matter of persuasion. It's a matter of being able to get people excited about it. And that's why this critical mass thing matters to me. I mean, I think these things are all happening, but we have to just ramp it up to make it part of the everyday thoughts of people.
I read NBC News published a bunch of years ago some of the emails you sent to your mother. And this one line: when you lay out and balance the value of my service to the country against the value of that same service to me, it quickly becomes clear that it is I who have been granted the greater gift. That's so, I assume you're not aberrational in that feeling. Is that fair?
I think that's definitely fair. I mean, I mean that with utter sincerity. I think because of all the things we're talking about sort of how the country writ large can be healed by people learning to work together, by sort of breaking down the bonds and forming these relationships with the other. I mean, think about how good that is as a country, but that is equally can say that's good for the individual, for me. I mean, the experiences that I had here, the friendships that I formed, the relationships that I've taken forward in my life, the perspective that it's given me on life, on others, has tremendously made me sort of a more complete and full person in a way that I'm not sure any other experience could have. Now, it didn't have to be military service. I think so much of what we're talking about, the benefit that accrues, happens in other types of service as well that we're discussing. Sorry, go ahead.
By the way, we're going to get to the phones. How did you feel? How did you and your husband feel when on September 12th, your son went to sign up for the military?
I felt proud, I must say. I mean, both of us felt that we love history so much. We love this country. My husband had a long experience of working for the government. And the idea that Joe felt he wanted to be part of something that was important. Actually, when you signed up, there was no yet war, right? So the war came. I mean, what was harder for us, I think, than it might have been had we lived in a place where a lot of people lived in Fort Bragg or things like that. We felt like there weren't a lot of people we could talk to. So we were waiting and waiting. In the beginning, when he was in Iraq, there were no cell phones. You know, you'd have a satellite phone every now and then. We'd have to be there. And letters. But the great thing is he wrote letters home back in the 19th century, and I loved the letters. They were terrific, you know.
So, Joe, did you tell your parents before you signed up, or did you present it as a fait accompli?
No, I told them after I had gotten back from the initial meeting. I would say it was not the path that they would have chosen for me, but they were very supportive once they realized that I was sort of committed.
Let's go to Tim in Worcester. You're on with the Kearns Goodwins. We're talking about service, mandatory or otherwise. Hi, Tim.
Thank you for having me, and I really want to, it's fantastic to hear these two great Americans speak. I just want to say that it's great to volunteer. It's an honor to volunteer. But to make it mandatory, that steps over the line for me.
Why?
I think that it's, why? Because it's un-American.
What's un-American about it?
Well, because you're made to do it. It's demanded of you. That's what you're talking about. You have no choice. In America, we do have a choice to volunteer, which is fantastic, but to do it voluntarily, to not be forced to do it like in Israel.
We got it. Tim, thank you.
One of the things you pointed out in your piece, though, which I thought was a great point, we ask almost nothing of Americans, right? We have to pay taxes. We have to do jury duty.
And if you're a man, you have to sign up for the selective service.
That's it. I mean, that's not very much, especially since So many of us don't do something that's not mandatory, but so many of us don't even bother to vote. We're sort of a couch potato country.
But we want plenty from our government.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind mandatory voting. Now that we're talking about mandatory, I think that's
next?
a really important. What's next?
By the way, a lot of countries have, as you know, Doris, but listeners may not, a lot of countries have mandatory voting.
Right. I mean, it's such an important part of a democracy to express your opinion and vote. And the numbers percentages that don't go to the polls are really troubling in a democracy.
Remember, I don't know if you were in Iraq at this particular time, but I remember seeing pictures of people that went to vote in Iraq, and they had the ink mark on their thumbs, and they were so proud. And then I thought, look at us, we're back here, and people are whining about having to go or forgetting about having to go vote, which I am embarrassed to say. In my town election, I have done a few times. I've forgotten about it. But, we don't participate that much. I mean, that's Robert Putnam's point, that we're not in these community groups like we were.
Let's go to Lynn in Chelmsford. You're on with Joe and Doris Kearns Goodwin. Hi. Welcome, Lynn. Lynn?
Hi, good afternoon.
You too.
Yes, hi. It's something that is kind of a mission-oriented means that our Methodist Church does, but we collect cloths and blankets to give to the SPCA, toothbrushes, toiletries that can be sent to places in need. It's a way to start with younger kids to look at the reward of it really is a wonderful thing, and it feels good when you know that you are giving. And even if it's a school system that is lower income, there is some way that everybody can participate. We're talking more right now on this program about high school and college and on. And in Chelmsford, I mean, it was part of both of my sons' applications. They were both involved in, like Habitat for Humanity. It was something through, it's called Army, in assisting local people that needed renovations or their yards cleaned or whatever. So there is a method out there. It's just, instead of having these fights about putting the 10 Commandments in schools, let's find ways that kids can have some sort of empathy and human compassion.
That was fabulous.
There's ways out there already.
That was great. Bad habits, when you form them as a kid, stay with you. Good habits
Without
stay
a question.
with you.
I think that's a terrific thought to have it go even further down. I mean, like during the war, when kids would be collecting aluminum or rubber bands during World War II, they felt a part of something that was in their community large. And I think there is a spirit in America that we see whenever there's a disaster or something that needs people's help. People come out. They feel good about doing that. So you have to just give them a place to do that when it's not the disaster that's right in front of them. And I think this is a great idea, what she has. And every school could do something like that.
And
this is the spirit we want to engender.
And sometimes I wonder if we would be as pessimistic about sort of the gross divisions if we were actually privy to conversations that Americans are having with each other, not being filtered through television and radio and sound bites.
Yeah.
Sometimes you wonder, it's like my son, he's in second grade, and sometimes I wish I could just have a camera in the classroom just to watch him all day to figure out what the heck is he actually doing. Is he getting along with people? I wonder if we just had cameras for average Americans interacting with each other without the noise, would we be a little less disheartened that people are as divided as we think they are?
By the way, your kid just texted he is for mandatory
Yeah,
service.
yeah.
This whole second grade class just voted. It was unanimous. It's incredible.
Karen
Very
and Newton,
persuasive
thank you
young
for
man.
calling.
Hey, Karen, how are you?
Hi. I just wanted to say that my husband and I were VISTA volunteers.
Great.
I'm 71 years old.
Yay.
And 50 years ago, we met in Joplin, Missouri, where we worked for a community action agency. And it was the transforming piece of my life. We were two kids from the East Coast, and we met totally different people. We worked with the most incredible people that we would have never met before. And, director of our agency was a Republican. Everybody else was a Democrat. It didn't matter. We worked together and did amazing work. It was a life-changing event.
Karen, that was great. What do you have, a reaction to that?
No, absolutely. I think the people who went into the Peace Corps or to Vista, I think that she's exactly describing what a lot of people would have feeling. The amazing thing about the Peace Corps is that it wasn't John Kennedy announcing it. He went to the University of Michigan to give a speech the next day, and he was going to just sleep there that night, and 10,000 kids were waiting for him. And it was 2 in the morning. He said, oh my God, I've got to give him a speech, and he hadn't prepared one. So he just gave a 3-minute, he said it was the longest short speech he ever gave. Where all he did was to say, would you be willing to go to Ghana and help there? Would you be willing to bring your medical skills, your technical skills, your educational skills? The kids were so amazed by what he had. They formed a petition themselves, and 1,000 kids signed a petition saying they'd be willing to give 2 years of their life to this non-existent thing. The Peace Corps wasn't even mentioned.
Wow.
And then because of that, my husband and Ted Sorensen were working on another speech for John Kennedy about 2 weeks later. They brought that petition to him, and that's when he proposed the Peace Corps. So it came from the kids themselves, which is amazing.
That's great.
Yeah.
We have somebody who wants to comment. Is Margaret here at the library, Mike, or is that, yeah, run, Margaret. Margaret is at the library right over there. She's moving very quickly. She's seconds away. Margaret, welcome to the show. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I'm struck by voter engagement, and I'm thinking about in 2024 how 90 million people in this country did not vote. I worked for the Boston Public Schools as a guidance counselor for many, many years, and there really are many schools that have mandatory capstone projects or internship projects, and I just think in our school, some of the very best capstone projects were the ones that were sort of social service oriented, and it got our students really engaged in our community, the community beyond, and made them a lot less cynical about voting. And I think that's probably an extraordinary part of what this kind of mandatory service could be. And it could be done, I think, in high schools as a requirement for high school graduation.
Hey, instead of the MCAS, Jim, you can have that the capstone program for the end. Yeah.
That was great, Margaret.
Thank you.
Any
reaction? That's a great
that's
idea.
a variation on the Casey notion, yeah?
Yeah. The 351 one. Yeah, in fact,
Project
my
351.
granddaughter Lena was in that program.
Oh, she was?
In Concord, yeah.
Oh, that's fabulous.
It's a wonderful
Project
program.
351 is this fabulous thing that Carolyn Casey and Deval Patrick, who also supports mandatory service, by the way, formed a bunch of years ago, where 8th grade ambassadors, as they're called, voted by their communities, participate in a year of service from 351 cities and towns, and it's just spectacular.
877-301-8970 is the number. Colin from Brockton, thank you for calling.
Hey, Colin.
Hey, first time caller, long
Thank
time
you.
listener.
Thank
Really
you.
appreciate it. Thanks, Colin.
So, what are we giving these people for mandatory service? As a veteran, I was given a home loan, I was given school, and I was given, with my disability, health care. I think that there needs to be a voluntary option that maybe falls short of these military benefits, but gives kids a chance at home ownership, a look at education, and a look at some kind of thing that's going to help them take care of themselves.
How does that sound to you, Doris Kearns
Sounds
Goodwin?
very good. I mean, I think that's better articulated than what I said earlier, that I think if they do this program, if it's not mandatory, if it is voluntary, but you're hoping to get it to be big, big voluntary, that there has to be something at the other end that is the return for having they given to their country, and whether that's help with this next schooling they want to do or help with getting them settled in the community. I think that's a terrific idea. It may not be as big as the military thing was.
Yeah.
But I think, listen, if
Colin, thank you, by the way.
If we are making the argument that this type of service, whether military or civilian, is value then the benefits, I think, should be the same. I do think, and this is one of the big barriers to the infrastructure argument that Alan Kay was saying, but yeah, no, I do think you want to give them the same benefits as far as education. I think you do need to look at, what happens if someone is injured on the job while they're doing this voluntary service. You want to be able to support them because their lives might be impacted because of the thing they've done. So I think that if you increase the voluntary, if we do value it, then we should make those benefits sort of run across the gamut as well.
Yeah, right. As it is now, I think something like AmeriCorps, you get a place to live, and then you get a small stipend, but it's pretty small.
Yeah.
But I think that's it.
Yeah.
I could be wrong, but I think that's it.
But you make a wonderful point that if it existed, that obviously it's got to be equal. People are giving of
Absolutely.
themselves. They're just doing it in different forms. Colin, thank you for the call. 877-301-8970 is the number. Todd in Attleboro. Hi, Todd. You're on with the Kearns Goodwins. Hello.
Hey, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I've had multiple calls in with you guys. Love your show.
Thank you.
I'm a former Peace Corps volunteer, 3 years, Mali, West Africa.
Wow.
Following that, I worked out of the Boston recruitment office for 5 years, recruiting people in the early 90s. Those are two of the best jobs I ever had. Peace Corps took good care of me. And as far as, let's say, mandatory, I mean, we've got a lot of need in the U.S., too. I think if we had an array of programs where we could, recruit and slot in the right people, it would do a lot of good, because it launched me into an international development career, which I still do, and I still travel the world. Still doing what I did in Peace Corps a bit.
Todd, that's great. And thanks for doing what you did, and thanks for your call today. We much appreciate it. 877-301-8970. Anonymous texter says, please ask Doris Kearns Goodwin what chances are just a few U.S. House members might uphold their current oath of national service to uphold the Constitution. That's a variation on the thing. Do you have any comment on that, Doris?
What chance? Good chance. I mean, I still have optimism that things are going to work out somehow. I mean, that history tells us that we've been through these terrible times before, and that the strength of the country has come through. And it gets harder and harder, but I think there's a feeling that's arising right now.
But can we spend, we only have a couple minutes left. Can we, I think we have done a pretty decent job, and I hope you'll come back and continue this conversation.
It was fun. It was really fun.
Well, thank you, and thanks for doing it, and thanks for your thoughts, both of you. But you said we've been through this before, but at least the two of us believe we have someone unlike what we've ever had before. A madman, the cruelest of sadistic madmen. That's different, isn't it? Or no?
No, I think the example of the person is different, but we've been through, just think about what it was like for the Civil War. People in families split apart with people killing each other and feeling that the country had fractured and would never come together again. Or think of what it was like during the Great Depression. 1 out of 4 people are out of work, and people are wandering the streets and they're hungry. Everybody is affected by it every single minute of every day. So, and think about what it was like in those early days of World War II, when it looked like Hitler might conquer all of Europe and Western civilization would have been destroyed. So we have to remember that it's a different problem we're living through right now. And it's really unprecedented what's happening in Washington, I think. But if we got through those other ones before, we have to have hope that we'll get through this one.
Are you as optimistic as your mother?
I think so. Yeah, I think she's right. I think when you look at sort of the history that she has sort of raised me on, that there have been amazing troubling things in the past. We've been through troubling time. We went through McCarthyism, we had the Red Scare, all these things when sort of society seemed to be eating itself, and we have come out the other side. I mean, we look at sort of the violence going on there, and my mom, was back to the Vietnam Wars, the protests, Kent State. I mean, there have been these kinds of things before. I think you're right in that, Trump is sort of a singularly figure that is sort of so deleterious seemingly to the nation. But I think I do, and it's kind of when we back to earlier today, I think that as you have conversations, as you have exposure to people across the country in ways that are not not filtered through the media or filtered through sort of these larger national conversations, people have more in common than they don't. And I think the more you get around, the more you spend time with soldiers or in different service organizations, you see that people are closer to each other than we might assume.
So before you go, I want to ask you, Joe, your mother wrote a book talking about the love story between your mother and your father. What'd you think of it? And did you find out any good tidbits you didn't know about?
Gross. I don't know what they were talking about. No, I mean, of course, it was amazing. I think I mentioned to you, my mom actually lives in the same building we do, right downtown in Boston. She moved in right after COVID, right before COVID. And so I got to be with her while she was writing that book. And it was just an extraordinary to sort of not only watch her creative process, but every day, I was used to, as I was growing up and she was writing about Teddy Roosevelt or Franklin Roosevelt, she'd come in with new stories about their life. But this time, she'd be coming in every day telling new stories about my father and her and things I didn't know about him, never would have known. So it was a magical thing to watch her go through that creative process. It brought my dad back to life in a way that was incredibly meaningful and continues to be every time we get to peruse that volume. Which
well,
of course,
seeing your father naked in the pool with Lyndon Johnson has got to be.